Hello. My name is, it's the last time I'm going to say because so many people ask me how to pronounce my name. My name is pronounced as Thijs Schreijer. Yeah. And you may all try, and the best one afterwards, the best one, I'll buy a t-shirt. Building the Kong API gateway, and I changed it a bit to observations on the Lua landscape as I perceived it. I've been using Lua for about 10 years, and mostly initially as an open source contributor, and only for the past 2 years I moved into a full-time engineering job for Lua. And I learned a couple of things on the way. This is where I'm from. It's the Netherlands, small country. Everybody always asks me whether I live in Amsterdam. I live near Amsterdam because everybody in the Netherlands lives near Amsterdam because it's such a small country. So, and I live there with my family. And now Thibaut is going to make a picture because my daughter, I told her that I was going to use her drawing. Yeah, all set. So, about almost 2 years ago, I started working for Mashape. And at Mashape, we do a lot of things with APIs, HTTP management, HTTP API management. A number of products, and the main product, of course, is Kong, the API gateway that we build on our platform. And as you saw, I'm located in the Netherlands, but unfortunately our office is in, well, not necessarily unfortunately, but the office is in San Francisco, so I'm working remotely. You can find me on GitHub with the username Tiske. It's a lot easier to pronounce. Kong is an API gateway, already mentioned it. Basically what it does, HTTP request comes in from a client, moves through Kong, and then goes to a backend server. And on the way, Kong does all kind of magic things to it, like rate limiting, custom plugins in Lua, of course, and a lot of other stuff. Basically, that's the core of what it does. It's built on Nginx. We've seen a lot of Nginx and OpenResty things today already, so that's what we do as well. Used to be Lua and LuaJIT. These days, Nginx or OpenResty dropped recently the Lua implementations. So it's only LuaJIT these days. And Kong as a gateway is an open source product. And we try to be a good open source citizen. But it also has its challenges as an organization. Because in previous jobs I had, we could do an organized rollout. We could plan when and where we would roll out our products, and it was easy to support. But when you're doing open source, you don't have control over that. So basically what happens is that our user base is on all continents. And once you start monetizing your open source project to enterprise customers, they expect support, which means that you'll be around the clock support has to be delivered basically from day one. The good part here is that we're a distributed team. So basically the red pins are the different locations that we have people working on Kong and support, etc. And that sort of mitigates the problem of supporting all the different time zones. So that's an easier part. Like I said, one of the things that I never considered when working on open source is that when you start monetizing it as a startup, this is really an organizational thing to look into. Back to Lua. We've had a couple of people talking about libraries, abstractions, support for multiple Lua versions. And basically, if you try to build a car, a real nice luxury van that runs in every circumstance, you have to make some compromises. This is pretty much what you get. So it just doesn't always work that way. In generic circumstances, you can create a lot of reusable code. But in certain circumstances, especially working on an OpenResty application, you don't always have the luxury to create something that's really generic. OpenResty is very specific in how it's set up, how it implements Lua, how its underlying worker processes, the coroutines, actually 2 types, the regular coroutines and the light threads that they implement, how it all works. And it doesn't always give you the liberty of supporting everything if you want maximum, in our case, performance. That's for an API gateway, that's what you really need. So you have to make choices. At some point, you have to make a choice and you go all in on one specific technology, and then you can no longer support the multitude in the landscapes that you might want to support. Obviously, it's a trade-off, because like Thibaut discussed earlier this afternoon, a big implementation like a Lua Xandra driver, that's something that's worthwhile taking some effort in, making sure that it runs everywhere. But a lot of smaller stuff, not necessarily. So, generic reusable code is good, but just use common sense and stop when it starts hurting. Another thing is, Lua is historically mostly used embedded inside other applications. And today, Hisham made a talk. You see? Oh, he moved. Sit still. And he about application programming in Lua and what should you pick? Which Lua version should you pick? What libraries should you pick? And basically, there's a multitude of things you can do. But the most important thing, in my opinion, that you do is stick to the underlying application. If you start working on something that doesn't work with the underlying application, then it's like going upstream. And if you like, this is a national Dutch annual contest of cycling in the headwind, so into the wind. Last year we had a storm and nobody actually finished because they were all blown away. So if you like that kind of contest, then try to work against the underlying application. But whatever you do, it will be very brittle. Every change in the underlying application or your application, it will have faults, it will have problems, and you'll be worse off. So in the end, try, regarding the underlying application, try to go with the flow. Just, in our case, Nginx, understand how the application works, how do the different workers share the memory, how do individual within the workers, all the coroutines work together, the implicit yielding that Hisham also warned us about this afternoon. It's really important to understand the underlying concept in the applications so you don't work against them and you get an easy experience. And hence, this is one of my learning points for the past 2 years. So you combine those, it's not necessarily bad, in my opinion, to roll your own. In the Lua community, there's a lot of fuss always about who's going to write the next JSON library. You never know. And for many, especially the smaller libraries, it's not a problem to just reinvent it. Not necessarily reinvent it, look at good implementations, and then build your own that matches your requirements based on what is good practice. Another thing that I don't agree to is that Lua is a simple language. It might be easy to learn. The previous presentation also mentioned that Lua was easy to learn. It's not a steep learning curve. But it gets hard fast, really quickly. And it's not because Lua is a different language or a complicated language, but it's because all the things that you bring into it. All your previous experience, you have to unlearn it. Because if you just jump into Lua when you're coming from a Microsoft background, a Java background, even a JavaScript background, if you just jump into Lua, 6 months later, you'll be refactoring all the code that you initially wrote because you did it wrong. One of the typical things that we have a plugin structure. We had a bunch of engineers that came out of a Java project and implemented a hierarchical object structure, and basically, it's useless. It's burning CPU cycles, and it doesn't help us. None whatsoever. So basically, you need to let go of everything you know, and the power of Lua, on the one hand, is that it has mechanisms and not policies, but it also puts the burden on you to make the right choice of what policies are you going to add to your application. And that's a difficult one. Because it's very hard upfront to see how an application is going to evolve and what are the right choices. So Lua is hard. And you need to, your previous dogmas and experience you need to leave behind. Another fiercely debated item is technical debt. Everybody has it. We have it as well. And it's just, engineers are never happy. Engineers always see technical debt everywhere. And it's just not, if you're in a world where you have enough resources to throw at everything, that's not an issue. But in general, if you don't have any technical debt, you really have polished it too hard for too long, and you really overused your resources. Every application should have some level of technical debt. Otherwise, you have not been efficient, really not. So you should be careful in assessing your technical debt to see whether it actually hurts you or not. If you have technical debt that's in a specific module that's fairly static, it's not going anywhere, but it's been used for years and it's solid, then leave it there. Don't update it, unless you need to. But really, it's not that big an issue. That was it? Fairly okay. Questions?
Hi. I have a question about Kong. I have Kong in production mode at the company, and we have 14 node Kong cluster, and I need to know, do each node need to know each other? Each node, Kong node?
All the nodes need to know all the other nodes.
Yeah, they need to know.
There's a two-step approach to that. The Kong nodes themselves do not necessarily need to know it, but there is an underlying communication mechanism through the serve process that's running that communicates to the others. And it's used to invalidate when it's a dynamic configuration. So whenever you update one entity somewhere, an API or a consumer or whatever, it needs to address it in all Kong nodes. And that's why the communication layer is there. But in the next version, it's going to be removed.
Okay, so my first question was preparing for the second question. And we have 14 nodes, but I'm thinking, could we have one Kong node on each client server, just to reduce latency, for example?
I don't understand the question. You now have 14 Kong nodes?
Yeah, and I was thinking to put one Kong node on each client server, so I don't need the client to access the Kong, to access the Cassandra, to access the upstream API. We could have the Kong node with the client, so it's in the same instance. You don't have the latency to get into Kong, so you get Kong on the same server. That
is pretty much an infrastructure question. You can just put the process anywhere you want, as long as it can have its network connections enabled to what it needs, to the data store, and etc. And then it's configurable. So I think, unless I'm mistaking you for something very specific, but in general, yes, that's doable.
Yeah, my concern is about the number of Kong nodes.
Whether it's a wise thing to do, by the way, that's something different.
Sorry?
Whether it's a wise thing to do is something different. Generally, we see most customers using containers.
Yeah,
we're using it. And then where you run the containers, that's up to you.
Okay.
But then creating one container containing both the client and Kong would be a bit odd, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.